Do you think a teacher who's repeatedly had sex with a student should get no jail time? Let's talk about it. Hey, 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 Charisma here. Welcome back. A teacher who had repeatedly had sex with a student received no jail time. Can you believe it? And I have so many more stories to share with you today, but this one takes the cake. Now, Melissa Rockensies, a married New York mother of three, entered a guilty plea to one count of endangering the welfare of a child. A teenage boy reported to officials at his middle school that he and his teacher regularly had sex in a car and exchanged lewd messages. Instead of the 7 years in prison she could have faced, she will have to complete therapy programs instead. Now, Law and Crime's Jesse Weber explained the allegations against Rockensies, her sweetheart deal, and the lawsuit pending against the school. Let's jump into the story because this is, we continue to see stories like this. And every time I see a story like this, it really shocks me. It shocks me because here we have a woman being a predator, taking advantage of a student. She's certainly much older than him. She's being placed in authority over him as a teacher, and she's taken advantage of this young child to have sex with him. There's no way that he's at a age at is an age where he can be consenting to having sex with an adult. But yet, we see time and time again cases like this where they get off scotch free. They either got to pay a fine, do some kind of community service, and now this teacher is being given an opportunity to participate in therapy programs. But let's get into the story and get all the
New
details here.
York teacher and mother of three was charged with abusing a teenager. But instead of spending time behind bars, she managed to walk away with no prison time at all. We're breaking down her twisted messages, this sordid history, and how she managed to get such leniency, all with predator catcher Chris Hansen and attorney Brian Claypool. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Over the past several months, we have reported on multiple female teachers and educators accused of taking advantage of their proximity and power over their students, coercing them into sexual relations. It seemed like week after week we were covering one of these stories. But the latest case making headlines is that of 33-year-old Melissa Rockensies out in New York. And I tell you right now, this is a different one, to say the least. So prosecutors in Queens say that she raped a 14-year-old boy on a regular basis for a year. According to the Queens County District Attorney's Office, Rockensies was charged in August of 2023 with rape in the second and third degrees, criminal sexual act in the second degree, and endangering the welfare of a child. Just after his wife's arrest, husband William Rockensies told the New York Post, quote, "My wife is innocent. She's the mother of three kids. She loves them very much. She's been a big part of the community at her school. We all support her. We're saying she's innocent. I won't elaborate any further why."
How is she innocent? She's having sex with a 14-year-old and she's innocent? Why? Because she's your wife and she's a mother of three? That doesn't make her any innocent. She's a predator, okay? She's abused her powers. She abused her power and the proximity to this child, and it is wrong.
According to the charging documents, Rockensies met the student during summer school in 2022 when she was dean at a middle school called Corona Arts and Science Academy. She was one of the summer school teachers as well as a counselor for the victim. And prosecutors say that Rockensies started grooming the 14-year-old boy by having sexual conversations with him on social media. A few months later, Rockensies started meeting up with the victim inside of her car near the school where she abused him. The criminal complaint says
Wow.
that Rockensies raped the victim at least once a week for nearly a year. Now, ironically, Rockensies actually shared a post on her Facebook page at one point in time about helping kids understand consent.
What? Helping kids understand consent? This woman is a pedophile. Clearly. I believe it's pedophile for whether you're a man or a woman. I could be wrong, but you get the gist, right?
Investigators were able to get their hands on screenshots of Instagram messages between Rockensies and the underage boy that talked about these sexual activities. How all of this came to light is a little bit of a different story from
Hmm.
ones that we've heard before. So, Rockensies allegedly went to the principal of the school last summer to report that the student that she was allegedly abusing had threatened to shoot her and her family if she didn't give him $5,000. This is according to
Mm.
prosecutors. It's not clear if the teacher told the principal why the student was trying to extort her. The victim has since denied ever threatening Rockensies. But after that, the student emailed the principal and assistant principal screenshots of his explicit alleged conversations with
Wow.
Rockensies and accused her of having sex with him. The victim spoke
Mm.
anonymously with the New York Post when this teacher was arrested. And he says the first time that they met up in person after school, she asked if she could kiss him while they were walking in a park. He told the Post, quote, "This came out of nowhere. I wasn't expecting it because she said that she had a husband and stuff. I felt weird, like I had to hug her back. I hugged her. I kissed her. That's how it started."
Wow.
Teen claims that every time he met up with Rockensies at her car near the school, they had sex. The victim claimed Rockensies would sometimes give him money or nicotine products. He says that the most she ever gave him at once was $500. Now, the New York Post claimed that its reporters had viewed some of the text messages sent between the two, which I will tell you are really stomach turning. Rockensies
Jesus.
reportedly wrote, quote, "I want to be able to kiss those lips of yours," and, quote, "I want you so bad, and now I got to go read kids' books like WTF." Okay, so that's part one.
I.
Now let's talk about part two. This, what appears to be a sweetheart deal that she seemed to have worked out. I'm not sure I fully get it, but that's why we're going to have great people to talk about it. So Rockensies could have faced up to 7 years in prison.
Hmm.
But according to the Queens DA, they informed us that in October, a grand jury returned an indictment of one count of endangering the welfare of a child, which is just a misdemeanor, and a harassment violation. She entered a guilty plea on both. And as part of that deal, she won't serve any jail time. She had been released without bail during the investigation. She had to permanently hand over her teaching license and resign from the school district. She was ordered to complete a 52-week sex offender program and continue mental health counseling for at least the next year. If she completes those after 1 year, the court will vacate the misdemeanor charge. For now, a temporary restraining order has been put in place that says Rockensie can't go near the victim. That will become a full order of protection for 2 years. But keep this in mind. Even if she fails to comply with the conditions that the court ordered, she would just be sentenced to 3 years probation on the misdemeanor charge. So no prison time. Okay.
Yep.
Let's talk about this. Let's make sense of this. Let me bring on right now defense attorney Brian Claypool and renowned predator catcher Chris Hansen, the host of Takedown on TrueBlue.com and the podcast Predators I've Caught. Gentlemen, great to have you both here. Brian, I will start with you. I'm not sure I understand this deal. If it was a deal, if it was that these higher charges weren't submitted to the grand jury or they were submitted to the grand jury and the grand jury didn't come back with the rape charges, all I know is these are incredibly serious allegations, incredibly serious initial charges.
It's crazy.
Now, no prison time. What's going on?
Hey, Jesse, great to see you again. Look, this is a catastrophic failure of a prosecution in this county, but not county, Jesse. This is nationwide. I've been working on sexual abuse cases for over 12 years now, represented hundreds of victims on the civil side. What I try to do on the civil side is assist the criminal side to make sure to get prosecution. By civil side, I mean there's a lawsuit here pending as well by the 14-year-old's family against the school district. What I'm seeing, not only in California, but cases nationwide, is a very lackadaisical attitude prosecuting these cases, and even more so when it comes to a woman who has sexually abused a young boy. It's a major problem because in this case, you make a great point. It looks like the prosecutor only submitted evidence on one count. That's insane. This young boy was allegedly statutorily raped throughout a year. There should have been 50 counts.
But I
There
guess
should have been
does it give
felonies.
you the idea that there's some weird history to this? I mean, I mentioned the idea of the alleged threats. You have the husband defending the wife. Maybe it was they could improve it. I don't know. You tell me.
No, not at all, dude. No, there's no way. Because you just made another good point. In these sexual abuse cases, Chris can probably speak to this.
Yeah.
A lot of times it's he said, she said, unless,
Mhm.
for example, he gets some videotape of
Right.
the alleged perpetrator saying that he wants to do something to a minor, or you have a text message, or you have an email, or you have a voicemail
Mhm.
where the perpetrator is saying, I want to do this to you. Here you have that. It's like,
Right.
this
The text
isn't
messages.
a he said, she said. So there's no mistake for these prosecutors to drop the ball.
Hey, everybody. So one of my favorite things about being a host here on Law and Crime.
This is incredible. As the gentleman mentioned, this has become a norm that we are finding. Women are abusing children, raping children, molesting, and all of the above, and they're getting away with it repeatedly. If this was a man, he would be behind bars. The system is unfair in how it treats men versus women for the same crime. And I don't understand why. Why? Do you think because she's a mother and she's married that she should not get the same treatment as a man, or the treatment that she really deserves for the crime that she's committed? Allegedly, right? So let's continue.
Crime is how passionate our audience is. You guys, you don't just sit back and watch. No, you engage. You leave comments. You give us feedback. You make your opinions known. Can't tell you how much we appreciate that and value that. And one of the most popular opinions that we have seen is how much you love our police interrogations. And I have to agree, because they are so unpredictable. They let you see firsthand how detectives uncover
let's
the
skip
truth.
forward.
Subscribe. Let us know what you think. Click the link in the description.
Based upon the texts, which nobody is disputing in this case, there's good evidence that that happened here. Now, you have this allegation that the boy threatened the teacher and the family. Is that legit, or is that something that, she concocted because she knew these charges potentially were coming, that the relationship broke off, or whatever happened here? To me, it doesn't make sense that they only got those lighter charges from the grand jury. It seems like there was a lot more evidence there to more seriously charged. And I honestly, I'm at a loss to explain why she's not facing more severe penalties here, more severe charges.
And Chris, this is what I wanted to ask you. Do you worry about her ability to be around other children? Right, there's a part of the idea in the plea deal where she can no longer work in New York in the education system. But I'll give you an idea. What thought about it? We have this sponsor. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's called Truth Finder, and it's this large public record search platform for people. Anybody can use it. You can look up if somebody has a criminal history, or if somebody, not necessarily if they're a registered sex offender, it would cover that too. But you could look up their history. Even if I would imagine a misdemeanor like this would be something that would be listed. But unless you use something like that, like, I don't know, or you follow the news, I don't know how you would know about her in your community, because these are still serious allegations, whether or not she was convicted of a felony.
Well, exactly. And we've seen this pattern over and over across the country, where school districts, some of them, may do a criminal background check in their own jurisdiction, but they may not look hard enough or deep enough to see if there has been trouble elsewhere. There have been a number of these investigative stories over the years, and that's how these people get dusted up in one school district and end up moving to another state, and they end up teaching there. It seems that this is a case also where sometimes society looks differently at the female teacher having a sexual relationship with the male teenage student. It's still viewed as, a little boy's dream. It's a fantasy come true.
What I said.
What's the harm? Well, there is harm there. And if you ask this young man's parents, I'm sure they've got a whole lot to deal with right now. Psychologically, perhaps physically,
emotionally.
There's a reason why we have an age of consent in our nation. And this is why kids are not capable of making these decisions until they're older and developed.
We were just talking about Truth Finder before with Chris and Brian about Melissa Rockensies, this idea of confidential background reports. Attorney asked the court to allow them to file a late notice of claim and have moved forward with the civil suit. They're apparently looking for compensatory damages, although it's unspecified. Walk me through that.
Yeah, sure, Jesse. Just to give an example, last 3.5 years, I represented, if you can believe this, to Chris's point, how bad this epidemic is. I represented over 100 victims in a massive child sexual abuse case against the city of Santa Monica. That's a city on the west part of
100?
LA, right on the ocean. It's actually a very beautiful city. But there was this program called the Police Activities League, where young underserved kids in the community would go, like, for example, during the summer and after school, they play games, they play sports, they do go in the computer room and do their schoolwork. And there was a guy that worked for the city he worked at the city IT department, pretended to be a police officer. He'd dress up with an undercover outfit, have a badge. He'd walk with his dog, show up with an undercover car at all the ball games and everything.
Wow.
He ended up molesting hundreds, if not more, kids in the 90s and early 2000s. And what happened there is, when we got involved, typically laws across the country are, you're required to first notify a government entity that you intend on suing them. A school district, any public school district is what's considered a government entity. So across the country, you're required to give what's called a notice of claim, which you're notifying of an intent to sue. And a lot of times, like what you're talking about, and even in our case, these kids don't know, they haven't told anybody. Think about that. They haven't even disclosed the abuse. How are they supposed to file a notice of claim within 90 days? And that gives these school districts a loophole to avoid these lawsuits. But one last point I want to make, just so your listeners know this. In order to sue a school district, in not only California, but nationwide, you got to prove one of two things: that the school had actual notice of a teacher, or in this case, this after school, actual notice that they pose a risk of serious harm to the kids. What do I mean by that? Somebody has previously reported,
Right.
like Rockensies in this case, or the guy that dressed up like a cop. It's called actual notice. If you don't have any complaint prior to that, which a lot of times in these cases you don't, you can then prove it through should have known. The school should have known. And that gets to Chris's point. These schools and after school programs across the country, they just turn a blind eye, Jesse. And the big reason why is because, make no mistake about it, all these schools are big business. They are business.
Very
Public
true.
schools, they get funding, Jesse, based on how many kids show up in their classroom on a daily basis.
Wow.
And if you've got a rampant sexual abuse scandal going at your school, parents are going to pull the kids, they lose funding, and they go out of business.
Chris, do you think that's a valid concern?
And they probably turn an eye. Now, if she's been allegedly abusing this child for over a year in her car and maybe other places publicly, wouldn't somebody have noticed? And most likely that teenage boy must have talked to his friends or a friend. He would have shared that information or shared what was going on, because usually at that age, they don't tend to keep things like that to themselves only. They may share it with another friend around his same age, or if it's being done in a parking lot, somebody probably would have seen. So the fact that the school had no idea, I find it hard to believe. I find it really, really hard to believe.
Brian makes. I mean, the idea here, let's say the school district didn't actually know, but they should have known how this was happening for a year, and they didn't know about that. In your experience,
Brian makes a great point.
What do you see?
Well, I see that they should have known. I think that, anytime you have a school and a school program and you allow one-on-one exposure between vulnerable kids and adults, you have the potential for danger. Things have to be monitored. Now, of course, there are mentor programs, and of course, there are wonderful teachers out there who take it upon themselves to tutor these kids, and they change lives, right? But if something like this is going on for a year, and it's the sort of unique crime where kids don't report this right away because they've been groomed, because they're confused, they're not ready to handle this sort of intimate activity, it goes on for a while before it's reported. And then the child is embarrassed, the child is shocked. We see this across the board with adults
guilty.
one-on-one exposure, ungoverned, with adults in positions of power. And so the schools do have a responsibility. And I'll guarantee you that if you go back and look at all of this, there were whispers, there were
Yep.
rumors, there were perhaps
Yep.
even contacts between school officials and this particular teacher saying, hey, do you think this is the wisest way to go? We see you spending a lot of time with this individual student. And if there wasn't that contact, there should have been.
Mm-hmm.
So, Brian, let me close it out with you. If this lawsuit does proceed, if it's allowed to move forward, what are we looking at in terms of damages, whether this goes to trial and they're actually successful, or there's a settlement by the school district? And do you think it would be likely settled by the school district if the court allows it to go forward?
Yeah, great question, Jesse. Typically across the country, if you're a minor and you're still under 18, even though you missed that deadline you talked about, the notice of claim deadline, most states or counties will allow the child to file what's called a late claim because the statute of limitations is told while they're a minor. So I think this young man will be able to proceed. Back to your other question, I will tell you, I'll speak to California. Jesse, we have seen massive verdicts and settlements over the last few years in these child sexual abuse cases because of what Chris was mentioning as well. The reason why is even if a school says, oh, I didn't get actual notice of this teacher, raping a young man, there are what's called red flags. And I actually wrote a book a couple years ago. It's called The Break the Code of Silence. And I talked about, I even listed at the end of the book, over 25 red flags that you could, any one of those, you could customarily see at a school. To Chris's point, for example, here in your point, this young man was what? He was allegedly raped over a year, Jesse. Those are red flags. Some of them took place in the school premises. Some took place parked in a parking lot right next to the arts building. So if anybody has a set of eyes and a set of ears and they're paying attention, they should see this going on. There's a legal doctrine called in loco parentis, which means in Latin that a school sits in the place as the parent of the child. So these jurors across the country, Jesse, good trial lawyers will argue that in opening and closing statement, that there's a legal duty for schools to take care of these students. But I'll finish with this. I mean, average settlements, for example, in a case like this would probably be in the before going to trial, $3 to $5 million range.
Wow.
And if you go to trial in these cases, we're seeing upwards of 20, 25. We even, Jesse, had a case recently out here in LA County for over $100 million. I'm not kidding you, for a child sexual abuse case. So jury, even though prosecutors aren't taking this serious, juries are.
And then we know the standard of proof is lower. And I will tell you, as we all know, that if this case progresses, more information could come out. So even if the criminal case is done through the course of discovery, we could learn a lot more about the circumstances surrounding this than we did with a criminal case proceeding. Brian Claypool, Chris Hansen, thank you both so much. Brian's always on the media. You can catch him every 5 seconds. And again, Chris, host of Takedown on TrueBlue.com, podcast Predators I've Caught. Gentlemen, thank you so much for coming on.
And there you have it. Incredible story that these stories are becoming more and more normal in our society today, where we're having women in a position of power with proximity to children, boys, young boys, and they're taking advantage of them and they're abusing them sexually, not only sexually, emotionally, psychologically, because they're not at an age to give consent to have sexual relations with an adult. Now, we know it's happened and it continues to happen where it's the man is a predator, but it's becoming more pervasive where the woman is becoming the predator or is the predator. And in most cases, I'm yet to see a case where the woman is actually punished, where she goes to jail and serve time. I'm sure there is, but what I'm saying, for the most part, the cases that I've come across or that I cover here on the show, the woman just walks away. She's just given a slap on the wrist for abusing and raping a minor, and it's not right. And we need these laws to change. I don't understand what goes through with the mind of the prosecution and these lawyers that they can come to these arrangements that the woman scot-free. What? Because she's a mother? So As the fact that she's a mother, she should know fully well that she shouldn't be doing this. Keep your legs closed. Keep it for your husband. Like, come on already. Like, the society that we are in is just becoming more and more degenerate. That's all I'm going to say about